Everyone is welcome here, it's time to make new friends. Aquavide Uskava, fill your Glencairn. Share a dram with the spirit of Edmonton.
Slenshaw. Cheers, my friend. Good day, whiskey brothers, whiskey sisters, whiskey friends. Welcome to the finale of the Whisky Book Club's fourth book of season 3 with author Carlo DeVito. The author's right there. Here's his book, The Spirit of Rye. Over 400 expressions to celebrate the Rye revival. And as always, I'm honored to have you, the viewer, with us today. As a quick aside, I gotta say, a lot of whiskey book clubs out there right now. None of them are going to talk to an author over, I don't know how many hours, 6-7 hours, trying to get all the information pulled out of the tomes. But we do it here. We go deeply. We do it with the author, and we love it. My name's Dolph. I'm the president of the Alberta Scotch Society. That's what I started this with, and I'm the founder of the Whisky Book Club. I'm your host tonight. And for those of you new to the Whisky Book Club, I'll tell you a wee bit what we're about. We're a home base. We're a safe place for whiskey geeks like you and you and me to share a dram, share a passion for reading, usually about whiskey or whiskey-related activities. So this book, again, I'll show it right here again. That is the 15th book we've reviewed on the Whisky Book Club. And it's one of several books that Mr. Carlo DeVito, man right beside me, has authored. There's this one. There's Big Whiskey, the new single malt whiskey, and How to Hold a Beer, and Jigger's Drams Whiskey Journal, and about 15 others, which we're not going to mention right now. I do want to mention the Goldfish one, which I think is cool. What was the title of the Goldfish one?
It was the Happy Healthy Goldfish.
I gotta find it. I gotta find that.
You gotta find it. It was written with Dr. Greg Scommel, who was one of the main guys on Shark Week every year on the Discovery Channel.
Well, and that was your first book, so that's special. So I gotta find it, and
with a childhood friend, by the way.
Okay. Right, and childhood, like childhood child, or like junior high?
No, yeah, we went through grade school together.
Excellent. All right. Well, how are you doing tonight? Welcome to you, Carlo. What's in your glass, kind sir?
Tonight I'm going to have a few different things in my glass to start off with. We're doing an Empire Rye. This one is from Stout Ridge. And they do a Foudre finish, which is a large cask, usually about 9-10 feet high. And it holds about 1,000 gallons or so. And you put in... it's a Solera style method from Europe, and the idea is that each year you put in your new whiskey and blend it with the old whiskey, and then pull out only a small amount each season, and it's called a Foudre finish. And so that's from Steve Osborne at Stout Ridge Winery and Distillery.
And that's got a light color there in your glass as well. So I'm wondering, is that
a beautiful whiskey? Really, they make a lovely 2-year-old whiskey. And one of the people that helped set up their distilling program was one of the same people that helped Ralph Lorenzo set up Tuttletown. So they have a great quality base, and the whiskeys there just keep getting better and better. And they have a wonderful mixologist who also works there, Francesco, and he's just a fantastic mixologist, and they're doing a whole series of turn-of-the-century Parisian aperitifs and Amaros to blend with their whiskeys. So they have a great program over there.
And that's one. You've got a couple, and we'll get through them tonight, because tonight's the night where we're going through the regions. So I'll repeat myself. I'm Dolph. I'm the host of the Whisky Book Club, and I'm your guy here tonight. And I'm nosing the Whistle Piggyback, the 6-year-old. I'm really impressed with the nose on this, to tell you the truth, because I love my rye, but this is not a young rye nose for me.
Well, Whistle Pig, as you know, of course, is a great whiskey, certainly a great rye house. And their products were getting better and better, and the prices were going up, and they needed a good bar back whiskey, is the way they explain it. And so this is a very affordable rye. about $38, $40 a bottle, and it's a 6-year-old rye, and it's a great drinking whiskey. As I was saying to you before the show started, I always know which the good bottles of whiskey are because they're the ones my friends finish first. And I have to tell you, that piggyback didn't last one night. It went right out the door.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, that's a really lovely drinking whiskey.
Well, I haven't tasted it yet, but the nose is really impressive. The second one I've got, and I've got many because we're going through lots of different areas. So the Taconic Rye.
Yes, Paul Coughlin over in the Hudson Valley. All that is made with Hudson Valley rye, and he's doing just a tremendous job. He makes about 4 different ryes, several different cask finishes, etc. He's doing great stuff over at Taconic.
They've got 2 different ryes. They got this one's the straight rye, and they have another rye as well.
They have a barrel, they have a cask strength, and they have a Madeira cask finish, which is exceptional.
This from a friend, Travis, that picked this up. He distributes it here. Park Whiskey Society importers is what they are. These were just guys that love their whiskey, and then they started importing barrels and barrels and barrels. They got
that's a good one. Let me tell you, that's a good one to bring in.
I like it. It was great. And I've got Yellow Rose, so we're gonna have
Yellow Rose, a classic out of Texas.
We'll talk about that. We'll talk about what else do I have? I've got the Woodford Reserve that we're going to talk about.
Woodford Reserve, Chris Morris just doing a wonderful job with rye.
And I think Angel's Envy.
Angel Envy, Wes Anderson, great stuff. So
it won't be a dram of each. It'll just be a taste of the other ones afterwards because these are 2 fairly heavy drams.
Well, those are some big pours. Yeah, you want to.
Yeah, so just little bits of the other ones. But
either that, I'll be talking to myself by the end of the broadcast.
All right. Let's start in on this because I didn't get to this last time, and we had 2 guests with us, and I wanted to ask them, but it's really you with these 2 individuals that I don't want to say I care about that, but this was really part of my conversation, my thought process. So you met this gentleman right here, Larry
Ebersol,
and that guy right there,
Pickerel.
And when you meet people, I'm really envious of people who meet individuals that it might be like mind-altering, historic meetings, people that you've known about for a long time, and life-changing if you had time. I'm wondering if you got to sit down over a long period of time with drams with either of these guys. And yeah, that's it. I know the interview process, sometimes it's email, sometimes it's phone. But I'm wondering if you got to sit down and they got to relax a little bit with you and kind of just let it all hang out.
Certainly with Dave Pickerel, I had a chance to sit down at least 3 times with him. One in particular was it was a good half a day. And I was able to even, I had met him at Hill Rock, and he and I even had a chance to go for a small walk around the estate and chat. He was hugely entertaining. He was this bigger than life character. He was just an incredible person because, first of all, he had this persona. When he walked into a room, that's kind of like when the party started. And it wasn't always craziness. He was just this, like I said, bigger than life character. But there was another side to him that was incredibly smart, incredibly studious. He had gone to West Point. He had been a chemistry teacher at West Point. And he was incredibly smart man, which I think was sometimes belied by the fact that he was such a bigger than life character. But as I think I mentioned in one of our other conversations, I mean, I remember having a specific talk with him because he was working on Whistle Pig at the time as well. And I said, "Are you really going to make this bet on rye whiskey?" And you have to remember, this is 2009, 2010, rye still hasn't ascended in the way it has. Yeah. He said, "Oh no, rye is going to be the next big whiskey. It's going to be a section in your whiskey store." And you have to remember, at that time there were, maybe 24 ryes in the entire country. So it was a bizarre statement as far as I was concerned. And he was, of course, 100% right. But he was great. He could talk chemistry with somebody 1 minute and just be telling jokes and screaming and hollering the next. He was an incredible individual.
Looks like a really
and he was a great teacher. That was the one thing that was really fascinating. And any time I spent with him, I always learned something when I walked away. Even if he wasn't trying to, he was fantastic.
Mm. And I really like the piggyback. I got to tell you, I just opened this up with you, like just now.
Right.
And the nose was surprising because I expected, but it's got a mellowness to it. It's 100% rye, and you don't expect the palate like this.
It's got a softness to it that you don't expect, but there's still the spice there, and it's super easy drinking. As my good tasting companion Rich Sursich would say, it's dangerous.
It's what?
It's dangerous. It's too easy to drink. It's dangerous.
And I could see this going down very quickly with some friends here too, because the flavor's there, the mouthfeel's there. It's not high percentage, 96.56 proof, so it's got a kick to it, like 48.
It's got some kick to it. It's not an 80 or something like that. It's higher proof than that. So it's a really good whiskey. It's a really good whiskey.
I'm going to suggest this to some people right away. That's funny. I didn't expect that because I've got the 10, I've got the 12-year-old.
Right. No, I get it. I get it. I have them both too.
Yeah.
But that piggyback goes down way too easy.
Well, that's okay. I said this before. If I end up having one dram for everything we talk about tonight, it's going to be quite the evening. So I really, really like that. That's great.
Yeah, it's a lovely whiskey. That's a really lovely whiskey.
And you have a great write-up of them. Like, you've said some kind words, but the write-up in the book, you should buy the book, get the write-up.
So we spent a full day with them. That was an incredible day. And their top of the line whiskey is called Boss Hog, and we did Boss Hog 8, and they did a completely deconstructed tasting for us, giving us 5 of the whiskeys that went into it and 2 that didn't. And you got to taste all the components, and then you got to taste the final dram to understand how they got there. It was absolutely wonderful. It was one of the most fabulous tastings I've ever done. I hate to say it. Unfortunately, we tasted the rest of the line as well, and that was great, but it made for driving away a little tougher.
Well, and that's okay. You have a driver. You had friends driving you around.
I had friends with me. I had backup on that one. Brought backup on that one. There was no way.
I think I would too. And if I had their ear and I could bend their ear for a day, 2 days, or whatever it was, like you could, they'd be sick of me by the time I left. They would just loathe.
Well, I was very jealous of Davin because he got to spend a night in that big fancy guest house they have. They threw me out at the end of the day.
Oh, okay. So we know our positions.
we know our position in the world. Oh no, we're always behind Davin. No question.
That's right. That's good. That's fine. Here, let's throw a quote up here. It's I like my quotes, as you know so far. Here we go. No, that's not the one I want. I want while. No, I'm going to say the quote.
Isn't that I think that question was about Larry Ebersol and
yeah. Well, you know what? Let's stick with it. We were talking before about how grain is bought and sold in the country,
right?
And the only way you know the variety is knowing the farmer. And I had a hard time with this because I expected more for some reason. You know what I mean? You know the farmer directly. The middleman doesn't even know what the varieties are either. And this is Michael Swanson that I'm quoting down below that you quoted. And so I'm wondering, can we say if the distiller doesn't know or care that there's so little of a difference and that the difference is too nominal for them to decipher, how are we deciphering it? How do we have to care? Why are we caring if the guys making it can't tell?
Well, so there's 2 parts to that, right? Originally, people cared very much, and then after Prohibition, there really wasn't a chance, to care because rye and even bourbon died a pretty ugly death in the 80s and 90s. But what happened is, number one, when you're one of the big producers, you're buying rye in bulk. You're buying shiploads of rye. You're not, or rail cars of rye. You're not out there working with your local farmer. You've got to get product to market, and you've got to make it happen fast. You have a very large supply chain. It's like driving the Titanic. You can steer the Titanic all you want, but if you have to make a tight turn, you're pretty much screwed.
Yeah.
So what Larry Ebersol did, which is part of this question, back in the day, you'd have a distiller or somebody who knew what the distiller was looking for, go out, examine the grain, smell it, give it a good looking over. But what Larry Ebersol realized was that there were contaminants in the grain. And the way you smelled that was that they would put it in an oven, and that would enhance all the aromas in the grain. And he said sometimes you'd get a load, and if you put it in the oven, it smelled like dirty sweat socks that were baking in the oven. And he said, and they would say, oh, no, that's fine. Don't worry about that. He said, oh, I can't believe that's true. So Larry was the first one to build a separate silo for Seagrams back in those days. And it was something that got cleaned regularly. Only grain that had been pre-approved went into that silo. Nothing untoward went down that shaft. And the baking of it was a huge deal. They would put it in the oven at a specific temperature for a specific period of time, and you could smell it. And he said if it passed the smell test, it made good whiskey. And if it didn't, it made terrible whiskey. That flavor was absolutely transmuted from one to the other. And so they rejected those shipments. That was not the standard practice at that time. People just took their grain and moved it along, unless it was terribly rank. They just took it and moved on.
Okay, so he's a quality control guy, and that's great. And let's say
that created a whole other level, and now that's the standard industry.
Okay, and same JP Wise, as I talked to Dr. Don here, and what they do is the same thing. And when they're looking for samples, they've got machines that actually delve into different parts of the components.
Exactly, they do core samples and go all the way down.
Yeah, but what intrigues me is that we're still dependent on our senses. It's kind of neat. And JP Weisers, he says I forget the lady's name and I feel bad, but she is the one person, and she's behind bulletproof glass.
Yes.
You never get. And he said it makes sense because this is a farmer's livelihood. They're bringing in this grain, they expect money. And if she says no, it's no for Weisers. Yeah. We're not taking your stuff. No, so it's funny that they're still relying on the nose. And
well, I mean, you have to remember too that it's no different than cooking. I mean, if you're cooking something and it doesn't smell good, who's going to eat it? And and that's very true about wine, beer, whiskey. If it doesn't smell good, who's going to drink it? And so that's really, it kind of goes back to that, whether you're at its most basic level. So there was another part I was going to bring up. Well, anyway, I apologize if I remember it all.
No, it's good. It's good because, well, I'm going with that. You talked about the fouling number, and could you talk about that a little bit for me? Because a fouling number, what's its importance? In the book, you talk about it, but can you elaborate more? Because which other industries use it? Because I don't think they just have this number for this industry, which developed, and I'm wondering who developed it first, who uses it, and what's the number actually represent?
Now, I do have that answer. Now, number one, it is called a falling number. Let me see if I can just find this. It's called a falling number. It's originally from the baking industry. And I actually have the whole answer for you because I thought this is one where I don't want to rely on my memory for this because it's just too important. But basically, the falling number, I don't know what I did with it now. But the falling number, in essence, was created by a Swedish scientist. And the idea was that it was used for the baking industry. You would test the grain, they would grind it up and run a series of tests on it. And the idea was that if there weren't enough, let's see, I'm going to screw this up, I'm sure. but it had to do with the carbohydrates. I want to say this as carefully as possible. It had to do with the carbohydrates. And if the grain was deficient, you weren't going to get a good bread. And it's still very useful for the beer industry and the distilling industry as well. So the falling number was created, I think, not even 100 years ago, and has become became an instant industry standard for evaluating grain.
And is it? Does it tell us how much carbohydrates are in?
Yeah, it has to do with the amount of carbohydrates in a particular grain, and whether either the bread will rise or the beer will make a sufficient.
All right. Okay. And that, again, buy the book. You'll figure it out. You'll read it.
Yes,
I wanted to put them on the spot.
Explained there. I'm trying not to screw it up.
and what's kind of cool too, if we look in the book, and this is information that I don't expect anyone to memorize, but there's got to be someone out there. I want to know you mentioned this before, but I'm wondering if you could tell us the fact checker with the different types of grains, because I was reading through the different types of grains, and there are just minutia differences between them, but you have a fantastic list of them. So if you were referring, this is a reference book for that. I think this is a coffee table book in my mind. On the coffee table, you're looking through it. It's a beautiful book, tons of information, but it's also a reference book for some of us that are right into the geekiness of the rye. When someone says it's this type of strain. So was she the University of Wisconsin, the lady that fact checked all your different types of rye grain?
No, actually it was, it was from two sources. So here's how I started writing down all these different rye grains that I was hearing about as I was going through. Now, the first reason I started doing this, there you go. The first reason I started doing this wasn't because it was something that was kind of esoteric and fun. In fact, people were making rye from different rye grains. Who knew there were different rye grains? I certainly didn't know when I first started the book.
Well, I'd assume a few, obviously, for different places are different, but that's one page, right?
There's several. I think there's 22 different ryes or something crazy like that. So I remember sending out the list to a couple of different grain professors of grain departments around the country, university grain department, and I wasn't getting any response back from these people saying, is my list complete? Did I leave anything out? How do I find out what I've missed? I got no responses. And I finally ran into the woman who runs Empire Malting up in it's either Michigan or Minnesota, I forget.
Okay.
And she said to me, send me the list that I'll tell you. Now, she had worked for, it was either Archer Daniels Midland or another huge food company, and had left the corporate world, sold everything, moved to the middle of nowhere and started a private malting company in the middle of nowhere. It's fascinating individual. And so I sent her the list, and she called me back literally within a couple hours. She goes, there's a very good reason why nobody's called you about this list. I said, what? Why? She goes, because nobody else has this list. You're the first one to compile it. She said, it's not the way it's done. She said, you call your regional grain dealer and he'll tell you what he has available. And that's kind of just how it works.
That's where you go. That's what's cheapest. It's regional. It works. Yeah.
So, but the problem sometimes with that is that those regional guys are just buying seed from somewhere else. So it may not even be a regional seed you're getting. If you are in the Southwest or say Texas, there are ryes that will grow there that will not grow somewhere else. So you grow that rye. The only reason I knew that was because I was delving into these distilleries and they said, well, we use this rye. And I was like, oh, there's another one I haven't heard of before. And so it's kind of the weird thing where the tail wags the dog. It's the craft industry who can't get in on the big shipments of rye. So they're trying to find rye that they can ask their local farmers to grow. Or if you're a local farmer, you say, hey, I'm going to grow this rye. And indeed, some of the distilleries, when you get out to the West and Southwest, are owned by farmers or run by farmers. They're going rye that they can grow and make a rye with. So that's kind of part of how it worked. And so in finding out about these different ryes, it really was the tail wagging the dog. There were all these little small craft distilleries trying to find ryes to make with, and trying to find a local farmer that could grow a rye that would work in their region. So, and of course, there was the rebirth of Rosen Rye. Rosen Rye was the original rye that was the most popular pre-prohibition. And so you've seen a number of distilleries or states start to grow that, especially Pennsylvania. You've got
that was these guys did the Pennsylvania rye with the Rosen Rye, right? The Leopold brothers before the three-chamber.
What's that?
Was that also in the three-chamber? They use that in the three-chamber?
No, he uses a different rye. So this is where we go, right? So we'll get to that. So they're growing Rosen Rye. Dad's Hat uses Rosen Rye. Wiggle out of Philadelphia, Pittsburgh uses Rosen Rye. There's Stolen Wolf. They use Rosen Rye. So a lot of the really, really popular quality rye producers in Pennsylvania are using Rosen Rye. And there are some places up in Michigan that are also using Rosen Rye. So that's making a big comeback. In the case of, and we'll get to him later, but in the case of Todd Leopold with the three-chamber still, he chose Abruzzi rice, which is an Italian rye, Abruzzi rye rather, which has a lot more. It's got more oil. It's got like almost like a fat content to it, and it creates an oiliness to the whiskey that you're not going to get with a number of these other ryes. He gets 30% less production per pound of rye, but to him, the end result is worth it. And I have to say, all the reviews so far back him up on that. But that's a completely different one. But again, there was Abruzzi, and you're like, wait a minute, nobody else is using Abruzzi. Where the hell did he come up with Abruzzi rye? So that's why it was really effective to start trying to put together a list of these different ryes. And even there were some people who were using chocolate ryes, which I had never heard of before. So there were just these huge number of different ryes that people were using as you went from place to place. Even now, so now what happens is I have a conversation with somebody like a Chris Morris over at Woodford. And, you know, he kind of rolls his eyes and says, I would love to be doing this. He said, but at our volume, I don't have time to fool around trying to, do this. And so they sponsored a study with the University of Kentucky to do a trial of different ryes that will grow best down in Kentucky. And so they're doing that. And there's Lexington Rye and a number of other ryes that they're testing down there so that they could start doing some local rye that would make them vertical as well. So there's so much going on with it. And I thought, you can't really do the book on rye and not have a list of these ryes because it makes no sense. So,
quick question. I didn't send this to you, but you just said chocolate rye, and I'm a brewer, so the chocolate malt, is it just a heavier Is it just cooked malted longer for the chocolate?
Some of it is malted longer, and some of it actually has more of a chocolate characteristic. And so it's a combination thereof.
Now, we talked about Woodford Reserve, and they'd like to be using that. So that I'll say a quote. I won't throw it up, but I'll say it. So while some distillers embrace newly created hybrids, others are looking back to heritage rye, just like Leopold Brothers, that might return us to the taste of lost whiskeys. So yesteryear type theory. So I'm wondering if we could generalize it this way. So large, more industrial distilleries like hybrids and hybrids with grains and yeasts, and place like JP Weiser's using hybrid yeast, and us in Calgary using their own yeast, so their own type of yeast. Whereas craft and small distilleries like more heritage grains, and most of the ones that you listed in the book. Can we generalize that way?
I think that's a fair generalization. I think that the thing to again, what drives it is regionality, and it's not it's an agricultural regionality, not a taste regionality. And so that's what will grow in my backyard is where it all starts.
Okay. Where it all starts. Your backyard. I want to know about your backyard. I knew it was the vineyard, but I want to know about the rye going on there now. So,
we stopped growing rye because too many deer were living in it.
I read that in the book too. Okay, so you did have it, and you gave up on it, and you felt bad about it. You were saying in the book that
I felt awful about it. I loved growing rye. There is nothing more beautiful than growing rye. It's got this beautiful sort of green seafoam blue kind of color up until the time it finally turns, and even the slightest breeze starts it moving, and it's like watching water, and it's like being on a lake and watching a shimmering lake, except it's green. It's absolutely stunning, and there's just nothing prettier. And I absolutely loved it. And harvest was always fun, but unfortunately, deer were living in the grass, and deer also love grapes. And so apparently, we were not only were we a bed and breakfast for a lot of deer. So they'd sleep in the grass and then go eat in the vineyard, and can't have that.
It's beautiful if you want the Bambi and you've got kids that would just
right.
Bambi, but if you're growing and trying to make money, I can see.
A very small herd of deer could clear an acre of grapes in about 2 days.
Really?
Wow. Oh, it's gone.
Okay. Hungry little buggers, aren't they? They're cute, but they're hungry.
Yes.
All right. So this leads into another question, and I've been amazed not just the lack. And this isn't your quote, you're quoting someone. Mm-hmm. So I'm amazed not just the lack of information that a lot of distillers have about rye that they're distilling, but also the price. And this is kind of neat. So what would need to happen in the farming grain elevator industry to encourage them to separate one type of grain coming in from another type of grain coming in so that they could sell individual grains instead of having one gigantic grain elevator where it all gets mixed together?
Well, again, you're talking about the difference. The difference here, number one, is size, right? Heaven Hill doesn't have time for that. And I'm not just putting Heaven Hill. Wild Turkey, Jim Beam, they don't have time for this conversation. They call up their grain brokers. These are major grain brokers. These are not some local guy. These are people who are buying and selling commodities. They're buying boatloads of rye grain from Sweden, from Eastern Europe, from Germany, from France, wherever they can get it from. Those are outside of North America. Those are some of the biggest grain producers in the world. And so that's, at that point, you're buying grain because you got to make whiskey, and they'll blend it later. Really, that's really kind of what it comes down to. They'll keep track of that themselves, but that's really what it comes down to. They're making huge amounts of whiskey, and especially during the whole rebirth of rye, rye wasn't as available simply because not that many commercial farmers were growing it because there wasn't the demand, right? So the farming had to catch up with the demand, which fed the distillers, which fed the market. So there was a 5 or 6 year period in there where you were a distillery, you almost didn't care what it was. You're just like, just get it in. Like, we got to, as long as it doesn't have a real funk to it, we got to make some whiskey. We got to get it out. Because rye had become so incredibly popular. So it was a period of time before that kind of quality control could even be effected, outside, like I said, of really bad batches, because you're just trying to keep up with the market. The market was insatiable for a good 7 or 8 years. They couldn't keep up with it. And even still, there's so much rye being made, way more than ever before in terms of modern distilling, and it's still not enough for the marketplace. So you've got it's and of course when it comes to the price, most distillers don't know what they're paying. They have a grain person who buys their grain, and it's really depending on market fluctuation at that point. It's it's a commodity. The price goes up and down as the demand goes up and down.
And they figured this out within their business plan as well. They know that there's fluctuations in that, and they're going to have one price, and because they're not going to fluctuate the price, they're not going to go up and down like the price.
Now, the only good thing is, of course, is that 2-year-old rye is actually still has a lot of sweetness to it, and it's a very perfumey. So you could sell 2-year-old rye very easily, and a lot of people do. So you can get your money back a little more quickly than stocks that you have to age on a much longer period.
Okay, all right. So have you invested in rye grains, sir?
No, I'm not that smart.
No.
I got into the wine business. It's the old story. How do you make a small fortune in the wine business? Start off with a large fortune.
That's it, and just shrinks. But your time and your patience and your devotion shows in the product.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
Yes. Okay. You can tell me I'm full of crap all you want. That's fine. That's good. All right. So
but it's true. The better stuff you want to make, the more it costs to make it. And I don't think that changes from wine to beer to liquor. I think it's all very much true.
No, I agree. And as much as I'd like to be able to make the best beer in the world as a home brewer without spending so much money, it's not. I have to invest in the different types of malts and different
and there you go.
And the different yeasts. And over time, I've got a quad that I've aged for a year, and it's fantastic. But this is a beer.
But how many beers can you afford to age for a year?
Yeah. Well, me personally, I've got 3, but that's me. But it's 20. It's not $20,000 worth. It's $100 worth each time. and when you're just a guy piddling around doing the Whiskey Book Show, and then on Sundays brewing, you can do whatever you want.
There you go.
I'm wondering if do you experiment that way on small levels with yeasts, and because wine industry.
Well, as a winemaker, I certainly did with my small little winery. We did a lot of open top fermentation. So I really, we would inoculate certain batches or certain things we wanted to come out a certain way. But even if we inoculated, we still did a lot of open top fermentation hoping that local yeast were going to play a part in all of that. And so that was very much part of what we did. At our winery, you're always constantly trying to test the yeast out, or for their various purposes. Some yeasts will reduce acidity, some will enhance color, some will enhance flavor. There's huge arguments over if you blend 2 or 3 yeasts. Some people will say, well, basically the dominant yeast will win out, and others will say, well, even if the dominant yeast wins out, you're still going to get some of the underlying effects of the other yeasts. So it's a big, complicated conversation. But yeast is a huge determinant in ending up how a beer or a wine tastes.
No, I agree. And talked to Dr. Don recently. He's pretty sure that the next big innovation is going to be through yeast.
I agree.
And he was saying that as well. At different temperatures, you could have the influx, or you can put different yeasts in at different times.
I was going to say temperature control is another huge issue. Do you want to slow down your fermentation so you're extracting some of the things you're looking for? Do you want a hot fermentation because it's going to cut out some of the things that you want, because you want a different kind of flavor? So that's a whole different conversation. But that temperature control is a huge issue.
And me stressing it. Do you stress yeast in the wine industry purposefully?
Some people do. I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad. Generally speaking, you can stress yeast a little bit, but what happens is if you overstress your yeast, you'll get a very hard-boiled egg smell to your wine, and you don't really want that.
No,
that's
not at all.
No, you know what?
All right. Well, thank you for that. We went off to an aside, I know.
It's okay.
And thank you, Dr. Don from JP Wisers, for your helpful.
One of my absolute heroes in the rye world, and certainly in the world of whiskeys.
Yeah, he's a great guy. And you know what? If people see him online, you see him on Twitter, you see him on Facebook, you have a question, he's going to answer it to you. He might get back to you after 2 or 3 days, but he'll answer your questions, and he likes the geeky conversations. So why not?
He's a tremendous individual. I've never met him in person, again, because of the pandemic and being closed down, I wasn't able to meet him, but reading about him and watching, I must have watched 6 different interviews with him. And I found him just an absolutely fascinating guy.
Yeah, he's a great guy. All right. Next, here we've got a quote that's already up there. I forgot.
I love this one. I'm all ready for this one.
All right. So Swanson created his Far North Seed Vault line, where he ran more than different varieties, heirlooms and to hybrids. And so that's the one. Rocknar. I wanted to say Rocknar.
Rocknar is the name of his 100% rye whiskey.
All right. And he did this to understand the
far
difference.
North. I don't know if I can see that. It says Far North. Right,
I do see it. Yeah. And so he's trying to understand. He each was made, they were barreled and sold separately. And I'm wondering what he learned, because this sounds a lot like what Jefferson did. And I don't know if you saw it. It was a box, and they had 6 or 7 different small 200 ml bottles in it, which they aged differently. But they tried to have as much in common between them as possible. And the only thing changing being how they aged it or the barrel itself. And yeah, here it is. My wife got this. So the Wood Experiment Collection. I love this.
Right. Yes. And I recognize that.
I'm wondering if he did something like this, maybe not put it out there to sell, but did he do something like this and maybe wrote about it?
Okay, so I'm going to give you a 2-part answer. The first part has to do with my day job.
Okay.
At the time, I was editing wine, beers, and spirits books at a place called Sterling Epicure, which was an imprint that I created. And Ann Zimmerman, who's a wonderful wine, beers, spirits, and food writer, and the biographer of MFK Fisher, took part in a dirt tasting in San Francisco. So I read about this. It was fascinating. So they had fruits and vegetables and some wine. They had 8 different farms, and you would taste the dirt dry, taste it. Yeah. Then they had it made into mud in a wine glass, and you could sniff it and really get a sense of it, just like you would a wine or a spirit, right?
Okay.
Getting all that big smell out of it. And then they really encouraged you to taste the mud because the water and a blend of water and air gives it much more, a presence. Then the idea was to taste fruits or vegetables that were grown in that dirt. And the idea was you could see how the dirt influences the taste of the final product.
Right.
So I called her up and I was like, and this is a book. You're going to write this. We're going to have a great time with this book. And she said, no way, no. She's like, we'll sell 2 copies. You'll buy one. My mother will buy the other. Nobody else will buy this. It's not worth it. I just found it so fascinating that what I did was I took one of our barrels of wine and I found rocks on our farm. And we put rocks in the wine and let it sit for 6 months. Now, when I first started doing this, I put the rocks, we would wash them off with just water, put them in the tank, and then put finished wine in there, close it up, and let it sit. Now, the first time I tried this, the next day I ran downstairs. We did it on a Saturday. On a Sunday, I ran down in my underwear to take a taste out of the, I was like, oh no, my wife thought I was like a 5-year-old at Christmas. It was terrible. It was like somebody had gone to the bathroom in my wine.
Oh.
And my wife said, how did it taste? I said, it's not ready yet. So I didn't want to tell her. It just ruins about $6,000 to $7,000 worth of wine.
Oops.
So I tasted it the next day before I went to work because I commuted into the city. It was even worse. 10 days in, it was you couldn't even smell it. It was so disgusting. I thought, oh my gosh, I've just ruined all this wine.
Wow.
And I ignored it and ignored it. We had this barrel. I put it to the back. And finally, our farm manager came up to me about, I think it was about 3-4 months later. He said, everybody else is too afraid of you to talk to you about this. He goes, but we need the damn barrel and we need the space. You got to get rid of that crap. Because I want you to taste it. If it's really bad, we'll just dump it down the side of the hill. You got no use for it. And if you like it, we're just going to take it and move it to the back somewhere, or we'll make vinegar out of it, whatever it is. But you got to make a decision.
Okay.
I was all depressed. I thought, it's $7,000 wasted. Every time I thought about it, I got ill. So he brought me a glass of it, and it was fantastic. It had turn, and it was spectacular. And so I said, let's bottle it and get rid of it. And it was a huge hit. My wife took the rocks and she put them on the counter in the tasting room, and we had a big event, and we sold out the entire run in a couple of weeks. It was, and then, of course, people wanted it again every year. They wanted me to do it again and again. Terroir is very, very real. I don't care what anybody else says. I really don't care. I know it for a fact. So now I'm going to get back to Michael Swanson. So number one, I did not know Michael from a hole in the wall. I knew a Far North, but I really didn't know that much about them. And it was through Empire Malting when she had said to me, oh yeah, nobody's going to know this list because there's only, so we were having this conversation. She said, the person you really need to talk to is Michael Swanson. He's actually experimented with this stuff.
Oh.
And she gave me his number, and I called him within seconds. And it was, he said, send me your list and then we'll talk. And we exchanged the list. He had gone out and bought 14 different seed varieties and planted an acre of each, and then wrote down his tasting notes. All the whiskeys were different. Every one of them had different flavor, profile, and taste. The reason he didn't sell them as a complete set was because it was too expensive. You're talking about 14 bottles of, $40 to $60 bottles of whiskey. Who was going to pay that? There are about a half a dozen guys in North America who have all the bottles. That's because he thought, well, nobody's going to care. I'm a freak. I did it for me, meaning himself. And all of a sudden it became a competition, and people were trying to find like one bottle of each to have a complete collection. And,
I would have been all over that. And I was wondering in the back of my mind.
Great stuff, Michael Swanson. And again, this is the Rock Nar. So he kept all of his notes. He kept sample bottles so he could do blending trials, what worked. And then the other part is, as a blender, as a producer, what whiskeys are there 3, 4, 5, 6 that you need to keep growing and blending to make this perfect rye, the elusive perfect rye. And so that was his kind of way of going about it. And he had copious notes. And I spent.
Did he publish it?
What's that?
Did he publish it?
No, that's all for his, that's all his R&D.
Okay.
I think if I were him, I wouldn't, because I'd be like, hey, I spent all this money, time, effort. You really want to know, go do it yourself. He did.
Well, I was thinking that he was hiding something. I was thinking that if it was fantastic or there was a big difference, it would have, just like my Jefferson thing, there would be the bottle. I'm waiting for someone to do something like that.
Well, what he did was, like I said, he kept the ones that he thought were his favorites that made a good blend together. And that's what he makes his current rye out of. But that's how he started his rye, which I thought was brilliant.
That's a great.
He was a guy who grew up on the Canadian border. So when he was younger, he said to me, I was drinking. He said, all these other people were looking for Overholt and all that. He said, I was 18. We would just drive over the border and buy Canadian rye. He said, we're drinking Alberta Premium and all the same thing everybody else was up in Canada. So he said, you love those ryes.
Awesome. That's great. Yeah, I need to try that. I need to go to the Northeast, I think, and just go, because people talk about the Bourbon Trail. They do. And Carlo, I'm a little bit concerned that you haven't developed your own rye trail.
I think I should do that. Well,
really? Why not? Because it'll mirror the Bourbon Trail, obviously, because the place.
Certainly, my fellow taster Rich Sursich and I have created one, whether we like it or not. We've gone all over.
Yeah,
I can't say enough about Rich Sursich. He's been a friend and a driver and a fellow taster. He's actually a much better taster than I am, and he's done a great job. He's a good guy, so I make sure I give him another prop.
We all need friends that make us look good, I think.
Oh, he totally makes me look good. He's got a great palate, a much better palate than mine, and so I want to make sure I get that out.
All right. Well, I think you should present it to him, and you get. I think that's it. the rye trail and
The Rye
have
Trail.
it
That's what I should do.
not at the same time. I think it should be prior to what's a big holiday for bourbon? I think well, the race. There's the
Kentucky Derby is the big
Kentucky
bourbon
Derby.
holiday.
So I think that's a big time for bourbon, really. So that kind of
Mhm.
week or month, maybe leading into it, the month leading into that would kind of be a big one.
I think of rye as such a northern experience that I always think like February and March should be rye month.
There, done. Okay. And we'll promote that, and I'll do my part in northern Alberta to get
February
everyone
is rye
on.
month. I still have time to get that in there.
I think so, and well, I'm doing well. I could hook my friends up, so we're good. We were talking about COVID, so this quote right here kind of comes into the COVID thing. So right here, boom. And this is Jake Holshoe from Rogue Spirits, and
Right.
nice write-up for Rogue as well, and for him specifically. Claimed to be worried about the effects of the pandemic would have on small craft producers, and I don't know if it did, but I'm going to say this anyways. He would hope everyone would go find an altruistic bottle of rye, a bottle that was actually crafted by someone from a place. We have an actual agricultural product supporting actual agriculturalist family farms. That's who craft distillers are working with. So Carlo, well, here it's on page 121.
Okay.
And the title of the page is Jake Holshoe, a rye distiller. There's a statement about supporting local during COVID times. And I'm wondering if this is a prevailing sentiment here in Alberta and BC with distillers and with, well, brewers and distillers. It's a big thing with us.
Right.
And maybe just because I'm paying attention to these industries more than others, but it seems these more than anything else. And I'm wondering if this is a prevailing sentiment where you are as well during COVID.
It's a prevailing sentiment, no matter what, and I'll tell you why. Having been in New York State and having been a classic craft producer, we petitioned the governor's office back in the early 2000s, saying, look, number one, these are not jobs that are going to be transported to another country. Right? Yeah. It's not going to be outsourced to Mexico or India. I mean, not that there's anything wrong with those countries, but these are American jobs. They're not going anywhere, and they promote local folks who are these are small mom and pop businesses. And they're not going anywhere. Not only that, but they promote local industry and they promote local tourism. How is it that the state can't find the time, whatever state you live in, to promote that industry, or at least give it the ability to promote itself more aggressively?
The New York rye trade.
So, well, I mean, in New York, obviously New York's one of the top 3 or 4 wine producing states in the United States, and certainly we have a ton of breweries and a ton of distilleries. It's a good drinking state, but I don't think that changes whether you're in Maine or Vermont, which have tremendous brewing and distilling backbones. Certainly Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and then you go down into Virginia, Maryland, Texas. Colorado has a tremendous distilling industry that I don't know how many people know about or not, but Texas and Colorado are doing some absolutely tremendous whiskeys and beers. So it's great country for those people who want to try that kind of stuff. And of course, Tennessee and Kentucky.
Let's actually, I'll ask one question and then let's go through the country. Let's go through the areas, and because I do want to find out certain things from them, from the different areas specifically. Because
by the way, I just want to say Jake has made the one wonderful thing about Jake is that Jake has worked in the northern Midwest. He's worked in Maryland, and he's worked on the West Coast. So you're talking about somebody who's made local whiskey in 3 different parts of the country. He's always been part of a distiller's craft guild, no matter where he's been, and he's always been at the forefront of pushing local craft. So he's a tremendous guy, great sense of humor, and funny as hell. and a great distiller. So I got to get that in there.
And a great brewer.
Who he is.
Really, Rogue is fantastic. I don't know if
Yeah.
you've had quite a few of them, but
Yeah.
we have. We had a brand ambassador here for Rogue and he did Rogue and Aaron. Those were the two that he did.
Right.
Great guy, and it was fantastic. I liked it a lot. So, Voodoo something donut is something that comes to mind. Voodoo bacon voodoo donut.
Ooh,
Anyways, I'm thinking this was one of the first kind of really out there beers 8-9 years ago, and it got me right into Rogue that time. How about monetarily? I don't have a problem paying a bit extra to give money to the craft distillers. I don't. And a lot of people around me who have been doing this for a while haven't, but I'm wondering what you see. And because most of the rye that's being sold is cheaper rye. You know that. It's the 20 for us, it's a $25, $30, $35 bottle. That's the lower shelf for us. For you, cheaper because you're in the States and everything's cheaper in the States compared to us pretty well. But for them to go up for a $35 a bottle guy to finally jump into the $60, $80 to $100 bottle of rye from a craft distiller, what's it take? I think I'm wondering.
Well, I think it's the difference between Wonder Bread and going to a craft bakery, right? I mean, Wonder Bread in and of itself, people don't remember, but Wonder Bread was the first vitamin-enriched food available in the United States. It was a scientific wonder at the time, and unfortunately today it has a little less of a gourmet reputation. But back in the day when malnutrition was a little bit more prevalent, or the worry about it was, Wonder Bread, especially during the Depression, was an incredibly valued food product. That, and I'll tell you what, still makes a great peanut butter and jelly sandwich, or if you're into fluff and marshmallow, whatever your thing is, it still makes a great fun sandwich for that kind of thing. On the other hand, what happens is, like we talked about with wine the other day, like you grow up and you say, oh, wow, at 18, Blue Nun or Sweet Riesling is a great wine. And then you get a little older and you go, it doesn't really go with steak all that well. And you start graduating to different flavors. And I think that's what happens when you're talking about large manufactured ryes, especially 5-10 years ago. A lot of the ryes were heavy with corn. They had a certain amount of sweetness to them. Not that that's a bad thing. That's a style that we've already talked about. But when you start going around tasting local ryes, they have, you can go down the street and they have, we're 95.5 or we're 80-10, whatever their blend is. And they're big and bold and spicy, and some of them smell like pine tar, and you're like, what the hell is going on? Or they smell like Christmas spices. And you say, well, where is all that? Are you flavoring the whiskey? No, it's all about how they're making it, what yeast they're using, what grain they're using, and how they're making it that makes the difference. And I think at one point or another, you sit there and you say to yourself, well, maybe it'd be nice to go to a craft bakery and get like a really beautiful loaf of sourdough bread that's got this wonderful crust and all that. I'll pay a little bit more than a loaf of Wonder Bread because I want something better. And I think that's true with wine, whiskey, or even beer, right? I mean, you can drink Budweiser and Coors all day long, but eventually you want something else, whatever that is. And so I think there's always going to be that segment of the market that says, you know what, I'm willing to pay more for the extra flavor that I'm looking for. And I think that's become more and more acceptable. I don't think that was true 10 years ago. I think 10 years ago, people were still going, it's sort of like going to the farmer's market. Like, all that stuff is so expensive at the farmer's market. Well, yeah, but, you taste a strawberry from the farmer's market, you taste a strawberry from Walmart, they're two different strawberries. Yes. I'm not putting down one for the other. I'm just saying there's a massive difference. And that's really all there is. And so you have to sit there and say to yourself, okay, today I feel like a loaf of really well-baked bread. That's what I want. And there are other days you say, you know what, I just want a Coke. I don't care. And you can go back and forth. There's no sin in having a large producer's rye, but at the same time, you're going to find differences, subtle differences, and which of course makes, I think, whiskey is now entering the world of wine, where people say, oh, it's not just enough to say, well, Cabernet Sauvignon, I want Cabernet Sauvignon from this place or from that place, or I want Pinot Noir from this place or that place. I think whiskey is starting to get into that place as well.
Do you think COVID's actually helped the industry? And this sounds bad.
That's a really tough call. So I'll tell you what I've seen of just the craft industry overall, whether it be liquor, wine, or beer.
Yeah.
Those people who had a healthy distribution into restaurants got hurt because restaurant sales are down. You can't replace those. That's all there is to it. So if that was a third or a half of your business, that's money that is gone, and it's hopefully, God willing, it comes back sooner rather than later. But those people got really hurt. People who were number two, sales through stores skyrocketed. So if you had a healthy distribution, you saw your sales skyrocket because people were staying home. Hey, I'm not going to be driving. I'm stuck at home. I'm going to have a cocktail with the wife, or we're going to have friends over. We're going to sit outside in the nice weather. We're going to have cocktails outside, beers, whatever that is. And so the liquor stores saw tremendous sales increases. And what happened was, in the spring and summer and early fall, if you had a small craft business, if you had a good, solid trade business that came through your tasting room, you made a fortune, because those people wanted to get out in the summer. Because again, I'm not going inside to a restaurant, but if I can taste outside by the vineyard or in the parking lot next to the brewery or the distillery, I'm there. Bring me the cocktails. We're sitting down. We're going to have some chicken wings from the food truck, and we're not leaving until midnight. So those places made money. But if you were depending on, I had some folks that I knew, and again, I don't wish anybody harm, but they were very kind of hoity-toity, saying, well, we don't really do a lot of that stuff. All our sales are through bars and restaurants. And you're thinking, well, I hope you were able to pivot, because if you didn't, you weren't going to make it.
Have a hard time. Yeah.
Yeah, you have a hard time. So I'm truly thinking that no matter how bad the Omicron was or is, that by spring, once you can start going back outside, I think sales will pick up at all these places. January, February, March for the craft industry is usually a really tough time, regardless. People recovering from the holidays and whatnot, so tax time, etc. So April, May, June are when you start to see the sales just go right up.
Well, craft beer and the craft distilleries around me have done very well, and not just because of me, but they've done very well.
I'm sure it was because of you.
Just a little bit. So let's change. Now we would usually be going into the after dram and a little bit more relaxed situation. So let's kind of continue with that a bit. But it's virtually impossible. I was trying to think of a way to get something like one or two drinks from every one of the regions, the Northeast, the Southeast, Midwest, Southwest, West in Canada, and try to do a kind of a show with that. It's not going to happen. I don't think
it's very hard.
But what we can do is we're in each region. We'll go the Northeast, and I've got a couple drinks from each one, and just to get some information from you about the distilleries, the grain itself, anything you want to put out there. How's that sound? Does that work?
That sounds good.
All right. So
I just ask your indulgences, a lot to cover. So if I have to look at my book to reference it for a second, nobody will be upset.
That's what the book is for. You're not meant to memorize. And this is a large book again. We talked about that before, but you get your money's worth out of this book.
600 and some pages. It's a text. It's the size of a textbook. It really is. I didn't mean to start that out with that, but that's kind of where we're at.
Well, and I think it should be promoted as a coffee table book. It's there, the information. It's pretty. You've got fantastic pictures throughout for the visual guy like I am. Lots of information that you can refer to. So this will go on my shelf because I'm I love my rye. I know I'm the Alberta Scotch Society, and I'm supposed to put Scotch. I love my Canadian whiskeys, but rye is my flavor.
Well, I have to say, I was very proud. Michael Veach of Bourbon Veach gave it a rave review, saying that it should be a part of every spirits library. So I was so thrilled. I was so worried he was going to say it's junk, burn it in the fireplace next to your Duraflame. But
I gave a rave review. You've got guys in there talking to you. You've got Lou talking to you in there. You've got Davin for the Canadian connection.
Yeah,
you've got all the
so much fun. So many great people in the business.
Oh, I love it. All right, so let's go northeast, and so right near home for you. I started with this, and this is the one my buddy gave me. So I asked him to give me this specifically because I knew that he did it. I had some at the tasting. I didn't buy some. Actually, I bought 2 samples at the tasting, but anyways, I finished the sample. Lots of samples. This one right here. What can you tell us about Taconic? It's classical looking. So, and I think the picture does say something about the distillery sometimes. Are they kind of out there? Are they going back kind of to their roots type thing? And you see the Texas.
Well, I was going to say Paul is a hunter, number one. He's a kind of classic Orvis kind of guy, which is why you've got a hunting dog on the label. That's who Paul is. He's a great guy. And I used to carry his whiskey at our tasting rooms because we are allowed to sell in New York State other locally produced products. And so his rye was one of the things we carried regularly, and it sold really, really beautifully for us. It's all made with local rye, and he's just been doing a great job. He's down by Millbrook area of which is sort of like the northern part of the southern part of the Hudson Valley, the upper part of the southern Hudson Valley.
Got it.
So and he's doing great stuff, and big fan of his product, and he's a good guy.
And these are lovely. And
he makes a cask strength. He makes a lower strength, and then he makes a Madeira cask finish, and all of them are excellent. And he's a great guy because he also promotes a bunch of other local ryes there, Fort Hamilton being one, and a couple of others. So he's a good promoter of regional product as well.
Did you have a favorite of the lineup? Because he does whiskey.
I tended to like the Madeira. I like Madeira finish, and it's fantastic. It's got all the strength, but it's also got some of that smoothness, a little hint of sweetness, but it's also got the spikiness of the rye that you're hoping for. So it's a great rye. I think the regular, when I say the regular rye, I forget what it is, 90 proof rye, is eminently drinkable. And like I said, we sold the heck out of it.
And there's 2 others from this region that I had a lot of. So the Taconic, the Whistle Pig, which we already talked about, and Dad's Hat.
Jeff Kovacs up there, an industry veteran, and they are making just tremendous stuff. And aside from the Boss Hog, the Piggyback is wonderful. The 10-year-old is fantastic. Now they do a farm stock, and now they are finally doing their own estate whiskeys. They have 2 young ladies there working there. They're just doing a slamming job, and Whistle Pig is just going to keep getting better and better, which is really hard to say, but they are. Really good. That's a statement when you Whistle Pig.
Well, and someone just coming in here now, I got to say again, the Piggyback 6, I cracked it open tonight.
It's super drinkable.
It is, and it was made as a mix. It was made to go into the bar.
It's made to be a bar back. That's their bar back whiskey.
But I've been enjoying it, and the nose is fantastic, and the palate, it's smooth.
It's super.
And for 100% rye, it is smooth, and you don't expect it.
Right.
So I like that.
And it's got so much flavor.
And Dad's Hat, I love it. I think this might be the region I like the most. Although if we look at
Dad's Hat, Dad's Hat, I would say that on the East Coast, the 3 biggest rye producers in terms of quality and size are Whistle Pig, Dad's Hat, and down in Maryland, you would have, which is of course a different region, but I lump them together in a very good way, would be Sagamore Spirits. And you've got these 3 high quality distilleries that only make rye. That's all they do. They'll make 5 or 6 expressions of their rye, and they do just quality stuff. John Cooper and Herman, I'm going to crucify his name, Malich, whatever I can. He's fantastic. Our Dad's Hat just do an absolutely tremendous job using the Rosen rye. They're doing great stuff. And again, in Pennsylvania, you have Stolen Wolf and you have Wiggle. All of them are using the Rosen rye. They're all making high quality product, and can't say enough about those distilleries. If I may interject for one thing, because this is one of the things that I wanted to make sure I got across. If you really want to learn about rye, the 2 places you got to go are Mount Vernon in Virginia, and you want to go to West Overton Village, which is where old Overholt used to be. And one of the factory buildings is still there, and they will take you through the entire history of old Overholt, the oldest continuous label in the U.S.
I've got that somewhere. Anyway, that's
okay.
Is there a unifying element to that region? Because I'm going to ask you about this for everybody. Is there something that brings all these together? I know you separated them into regions, but can you give them something else that's
I mean, the Northeast makes big, spiky, spicy rye. That's if you want something that's really going to bust out of a drink, you want especially Dad's Hat and Sagamore. Dad's Hat is the most spicy of all of them. But the 3 of them make some of the best ryes. They're the kind of ryes that if you're going to make a Manhattan, you want that 90-something proof rye from Sagamore or Dad's Hat or even Whistle Pig, and you want to put it in that drink. It's going to stand out. You can make it old-fashioned with it. You can make a Manhattan with it. They make wonderful drinks, and or you can just sip them on ice or sip them with your whiskey rocks if that's your thing. But they all make big, bold whiskeys, and I think they're some of the biggest and boldest whiskeys of the industry. Certainly, Dad's Hat is much bigger and bolder than both Whistle Pig and Sagamore. Have a little smoothness to them in their background, whereas especially Dad's Hat is a good big slap in the face. But I love it.
No, I do too. I like it. But I had it the first 2 weeks, so I didn't. This also has on the nose at the end, it's kind of perfumey. It's
a wonderful perfumey nose too. And that's the other thing about rye that people don't realize. Rye can express a lovely perfuminess that's just really incredible.
And this is, it's been opened up. So it's been in my glass and heated up by my hand for probably, over an hour now, an hour and 20 minutes. But that's what I'm getting with the heat. And it's lovely. All right. So we're going from the Northeast to the Southeast, and I'm just going to name some of the ones that I have, and I'll pour one of them. So we've got the Angel's Envy. There's tons in the book. This is the biggest section, but these are the ones I have. I've got Angel's Envy, Old Forester, Bullet, Quarter Horse, Pikesville, Booker's, Michter's, James E. Pepper, which I'm going to have again. I've got that up there, and I think I'm in the mood for that right now. Wild Turkey, Woodford Reserve, George Dickel, Jack Daniels. These are big names. These are names you've heard of, and usually, because of bourbon, I think, in the first case. Large section, very popular, and I don't know. I was trying to think of a uniting thought pattern for these guys, and I can't. I think I'm hoping you can, because I can't. And I'll try the Woodford Reserve, because I think you wanted to talk about this as well, right?
Right. Well, I'm going to start off with Angel's Envy for a specific reason. Angel's Envy was Wes Henderson and Lincoln Henderson started that distillery. And what's important about Angel's Envy is that it was really the first distillery to establish a high-end brand that was meant to compete more on a world stage than on I don't want to say more than on the domestic stage, but it was something that was meant to compete internationally. 15 years ago,
I think you get them at the
15 years ago, if you went to Japan or you went to Europe, you found Jim Beam or Wild Turkey And that was and Jack Daniels, and that was all. You just shot your load there. That was it. Because American whiskey was looked down on as inexpensive, drinkable stuff. It wasn't collector item stuff. Right. And you had to give a lot of credit to Lincoln and West. They really wanted to establish a brand that would be at that sort of single malt whiskey, has to be in an airport kind of thing. Yeah. And that was really part of that sort of international style whiskey that they were trying to take bourbon and rye to. And it's really a spectacular thing. On the other hand, Chris Morris, not that he's not doing a great job, Chris Morris is just so important to the industry in 1,000 different ways. But when it comes to rye, he was one of the main catalysts, along with several others. I don't want to just put it all on him, but to help bring back the Washington, the Mount Vernon distillery. And he because of course Woodford Reserve is part of Brown-Forman, and they realized he seemed to have gotten just a slightly earlier jump on rye than other people. I gotta give him credit for that. So they had more rye to get out there with, and he was taking wonderful liberties with rye in a really wonderful way. And if you go to their store, they have a double rye that's just absolutely spectacular down there in Kentucky.
Now you say double rye. What do you mean by double rye? Double barrel rye?
It's aged. It's aged for 2 years, and then it's rebarreled and aged again.
Okay.
So it's a really lovely rye, and you can only get it at their tasting room. It's absolutely spectacular stuff. So he was fantastic. He was a great help. He actually one of the great things that he found for me was he found the I think it was like 09, 07, it's in the book, recipe for rye in Kentucky that was being made there. And I think it was a 60, 35, 5 blend, meaning 65 rye, 35 corn, 30 corn and 5% malted barley recipe. I forget what the actual blend, it was something in that ballpark. And he had that going back to 1909. So you knew that in Kentucky, they were making rye all the way back then. And he had the actual recipe. It was in a building where they were just throwing stuff out. And they said, "What's all this?" And somebody said, "I don't know, it's just all these old papers." And so they took a look and they went, "Oh, these are all the old L&G records from back in the day." And it actually had the records for their brewing and distilling. Yep. So production. So you literally go through it, and he found all this old stuff. So he was an incredible resource for information in that way. That was absolutely fabulous. So huge props to him, and they're doing some wonderful stuff with rye over there. And of course, Old Forester came out with a new rye as well. So that's kind of fun. What were some of the other ones?
I had a friend give me that, and I was going to bring that down, but I forgot. It was a sample that he gave me, so I was looking forward to that.
I'm going to say something about George Dickel, because George Dickel is another one of these ones that we're going to get. Again, we keep alluding to the Todd Leopold and this 3-chamber still, but one of the things that I was so absolutely thrilled about is that Denise Austin is down in Texas, in Tennessee, at George Dickel, and she participated with Todd Leopold at Leopold Brothers. So it's a combination of three-chamber still rye and column rye, which is really truly what most rye was back in the day before pre-prohibition. Even though 3-chamber still from like 1900 to 1928 was fairly popular, in the large process stuff, it was a combination of 3-pot and chamber. So it was, and column.
Now, when you say column, are you saying beer still column or an actual column with
a beer still column,
25 plates or whatever it is?
So it was fascinating, because that's again a historic blend. Here's people who are bringing back historical whiskeys in a great way. And that's George Dickel, which is one of the larger, distilleries in the Southeast, and they're partaking in doing some of this really cool cutting edge stuff. So you got to give props there. One of the other places whose rye I liked was, it was interesting to note that Jack Daniels put out their first rye, which was very good. It was very tasty, super smooth, a wonderful whiskey. And so Chris did that. He's doing a great job over there at Jack Daniels. And then, of course,
because I don't know if you've seen it, the James E. Pepper one. Can you tell me anything about it?
A very popular whiskey, super smooth and very easy drinking. It's a fun rye whiskey.
It's an odd nose on it. Odd good.
It's
unique.
Yes. And they're doing a great job down over there. Really like what they're doing over there. So there's so much going on in Kentucky and Tennessee these days. It's insane. So so many little distilleries have started up in Tennessee. They went from 3 to 45 in less than 10 years. So that's an exploding industry in Tennessee.
Can we just say that there's more of a corn influence then for most?
Oh, absolutely. As you get further south, there's more of a corn influence. There's a sweeter influence. And that's the biggest difference between, say, the Northeast, where you're tasting Dad's Hat, and which is 100% rye, right? It's 95 rye, 5% malted rye. 100%. And then you're talking about something from, say, one of these other larger producers in Kentucky or Tennessee. They're adding a little more corn, that hint of sweetness, that sort of Maryland rye, if you will, or Maryland Kentucky rye that you're tasting, which is a little bit more corn, a little more caramel, a little more cereal to it. Makes it very easy drinking, which is why that pepper has that very easy drinking taste. It's got that little bit of cereal to it.
And my intent with this, and I'm eliciting your help with this, is to be able to have a blind tasting, and maybe just like, people would do with Scotch, is try to narrow it down with a region. I know it's kind of an old way of thinking with Scotch, because within a region, the diversity is huge, and I'm sure it is here as well. But I'm wondering, I'm trying to draw just bold.
Well, I would think that the ones that I mentioned for the Northeast are probably among the most unique. Are there a couple out west that do the same thing? Yeah, like I would say that Koval and far north are also doing. You find that as you go across the top of the country, again, where there's a lot of rye being grown, you're tasting that same kind of thing. It's not Northeast and then south. It's when you say it's north, it's Canada, northern America, and then Southern America. That's really the bands of level that you're talking about.
All right,
because it's agricultural based.
Because I could picture this in my mind as I'm drinking it, and I could do that. So
because we get trapped in, I'm trying to do travel regions, right? That's the way the publisher said, why don't we do it by travel region? And it seemed like a very good separating point. But if I had to say taste-wise, it would be a band across the United States, north versus south. I'm not starting a war or anything.
All right, and I'll get to that in a bit. But let's ask you a question. Let's interrupt this flow that we have just for 1 second. When you go to a distillery, what endears you to a distillery? What makes you remember them specifically? Because you've been to a lot, you've gone to a lot, and if you're like me, you've had the tours, you see what they have, and maybe you remember the type of stills they have, maybe you remember their fermenting tanks, maybe you remember these things, but what makes you remember a distillery personally? I guess.
Wow. I'll tell you what, it's the same thing. Having been both a writer and a producer, I've been on both sides of the aisle, right? And the one thing I'm asked to give lectures sometimes to other producers. And the first thing I always tell everybody is, tell a story. Every writer has been walked around a distillery, a winery, a brewery, and there's my tanks and my hoses and my pumps and my barrels. Writers kind of roll their eyes going, like, I haven't seen this stuff before. What I'd rather want to know is what's your story? What is it that you are doing that's different or unique? Sometimes, I can't lie. Like, one of the things that I was fascinated by is that when you go to Rabbit Hole, it's got to be in like the next James Bond movie. The place is one of the most unique buildings I have ever seen in my entire life. It's about 3-4 stories high with these massive column stills, etc. And it's all glass on the outside and it's all super modern. You can actually see the whiskey being transported under the floor as it goes from one place to another. It's absolutely fascinating. And it was all glass, right? And I said, why? And he said transparency. And he said, I'm not trying to be funny. Literally, I want you to see how the whiskey is made. We're not hiding anything. I want you to be able to see those guys working. I want you to see the liquid running. We're not trying to hide anything. We're trying to show you what we do. And I thought that was fascinating. You go meet Craig, Mr. Claiborne over at Peerless. Now, this is the most fascinating because most, when you're talking about wine or whiskey, people blend to smooth out a product. This has a hole. Doesn't have a great back end. It doesn't have a great front. It's got no middle. Whatever those things are that you're trying, there's not a lot of caramel. Let's find something that has a little bit more caramel to blend into this thing to make it a more well-rounded whiskey. They have the absolute opposite concept. They're like, oh, you know what? We're tasting lemon in this one. If they can find 5 more that taste like lemon, they put those 5 lemons together, and that's one of their whiskeys. And they have like a series of flavor notes that they start to separate out instead of blending. And it's absolutely fascinating. And those are the kinds of things that you remember. Obviously, Todd has a great story with his 3-chamber still. Far North has the experimentation with their different ryes. There's this one guy, Greg Metz, who does slow proofing. So he actually proofs the whiskey as it ages, and they keep rebarreling it as they slow proof it down. Really fascinating theory. You've got Steve Osborne over at Stout Ridge who's doing the Foudre finish. There are all these guys who are experimenting, and you remember those people, right? Because they're doing something unique. They're trying to bring something different to their product. And if you could talk to those guys, or Don Diamante when you're talking about yeast, and he can go off for like an hour on yeast, and you're sitting there going, I can talk to this guy. I can talk to him on 1,000 different levels because they've got a story to tell. When you go to a place and they're like, yeah, we made rye and blah, blah, blah. And you're like, don't you have more passion than that when it comes to that? I want to be with I want to drink somebody's product. And you know what? That doesn't change from beer to wine to liquor. If you don't have a passion for it, why are you making it? Why am I drinking it? And so that's the part that I always try to impart to producers, as well as when I'm making a product. Why is this special? Why is this different? And then you can chat all day long, and it's about, how do you do this? How, you could tell who has a passion and who's making product. There's a difference.
No, I agree.
And the other side
is there
of
a
it
difference in your mind between endearing and impressed? Because I was going to ask this. How many people have impressed you? How many have endeared you to their story? So,
I'd say it's about 50-50. There's a lot of people smarter than me. When you talk to a Larry Ebersold, or you talk to a Dave Pickrell, you talk to Martin LaBerge at Crown Royal, you talk to somebody like, you just listen to Dr. Don.
So this is impressive.
There are people, what's that?
This is the impressed part.
These people are absolutely, they're just head and shoulders above me. They could talk to me all day long. And I just sit there going, and I'm trying to soak up as much information as possible. They're fascinating. They're incredibly well trained. They're incredibly knowledgeable. And there are people in the craft industry as well. I'm going blank suddenly because when you're talking about people at that level, they have such an expertise. I mean, Dr. Dunn was a microbiologist before he became involved in the liquor business. As we said earlier, Dave Pickerel was a chemistry teacher. What's the name? Larry was a chemistry major in Louisville. I mean, you're talking about people that can talk the molecule level with you if you really want to get down to it. But they also have tremendous experience. I mean, that experience is a huge, huge winner. I mean, I got to be honest. I just started over at another winery, little mention, Unionville Winery in New Jersey. But if you're not learning, what fun is it, right? If you're just, it's a constant learning process. The longer you're in the business, the more you learn. There's just no question about it, unless you're just making bowling balls, at which point, why are you in the business? And that's kind of where I'm at. But especially at those bigger places, they're trusting you with hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars of liquid every day. And so the people who they bring in already have so much more knowledge than I do. It's fascinating. And when you read about some of the old timers, you're talking about people that you think you're inventing the wheel, and they're like, yeah, I did that 40 years ago. It's kind of silly, yeah. So it's there are a lot of people who impress that are doing new and different things, and you sit there and you go, wow. And then, as either as a winemaker or as somebody who's sitting around here doing what I do, I say, how can I? That's really cool. Like, how can I adapt that to what I do? Not copy it, but is there a way I can apply some of that to what I do? And if you're not thinking like that, like I said, you're just dead anyway. So what's the point?
You know what? And that's any job. I'm a teacher, same thing. If you're not passionate about it, get out.
Exactly.
Try to find your passion somewhere, buddy, somewhere. And you'll be happier for it. Whatever you do, it'll be better.
And others will be happier for it.
Yes. And your husbands, wives, whoever it is around you, they'll be really, really good. So, I'm going to go from here to Midwest. So let's get back to this. So Midwest, I only had one Koval. That's the only one. I didn't pull it out.
Koval is a fascinating producer. They are like a super team. It's a husband and wife. They are slick. They're smart. Again, Koval's a guy that, I mean, he just is so impressive. He has done so much to innovate the equipment and the production level of whiskey, and he's brought that down to the craft level. So what he's done is absolutely fascinating, and he's installed, dozens and dozens of really high quality fermentation and especially distillation products around the country. He's an expert that few people can match. And on top of it, just so happens they make great whiskey, they make great spirits. And they're a difficult team. I mean, in terms of, they're a difficult team to match somebody else up against because they're so smart and they're so stylish, and yet they are so technically adept. It's just an amazing duo, and they really rock.
And they're in the Midwest, and there's not a lot that I have, which doesn't mean they're not quality products in the Midwest. It's just what we have access to here in Alberta.
Right. So I mean, obvious MGP. Right. MGPs, obviously, they're making product for a whole bunch of people. Still one of the state-of-the-art distilleries in the entire North America. I mean, they were a part or sister distilleries with some of the distilleries in Canada, and they remain the largest single distillery in the United States. And they produce just a huge amount of product that gets consumed. and some of it's very, very good. And I think,
Yes.
the problem that we sort of like, oh, well, it's a big industrial thing. Yeah, but they're still making great whiskey. That's like saying Crown Royal doesn't make good whiskey. Of course they make great whiskey. Alberta Distillers doesn't make good whiskey. Of course they make great whiskey. MGP makes some really great whiskey.
Have they scared other people out of the Midwest?
What's that?
Have they scared other people out of the Midwest, maybe? They're just so big.
No, I don't think so. No, not at all. I think there are places, I'm going to just look through my little Midwest section here. This is where I need to take just a quick gander, because I know there's a whole bunch of stuff that I really like in the Midwest. So I'm just going to take a quick, my apologies.
And I just couldn't suggest any for you. I'm sorry, because again, you don't have a distribution.
Few is really fantastic. Few is doing really great stuff. I love their rye whiskey. Few Spirits, really, really great stuff. Can't say enough about Few. Robert Biernicker is the guy from Koval. Fantastic stuff.
I should say I do have this, and what I did is I made the Few their white
there you
dog.
Go.
I made their white dog into my own, because I bought one of those 2-liter barrels, and I put the Few into my little barrel, the experiment.
Oh, there you go.
So I did that into a port, actually, and I haven't tried
very
this
nice.
for a while. So I'm gonna
18th Street Distillery in Indiana is a small distillery. They make lovely whiskey, but the most fascinating is that Drew Fox, who is the owner, started out as a brewery, became a distillery. He's become one of the most important people in Indiana. He's just doing a great job there. He's become a kind of legend. Cardinal Spirits with their straight rye whiskey is doing some wonderful, wonderful stuff. Love their stuff. Let's see. Obviously, there's Templeton Rye, which is a famous rye, certainly out of that region. And there's one more that I really like. It's going to be Mammoth Distilling. Love Mammoth Distilling. They're in where are they? Michigan, Illinois. They're fantastic. They're making they make woolly rye whiskey, and they make a borrowed time northern rye whiskey. Really, really great stuff from the people at Mammoth Distilling. Gotta try some Mammoth Distilling.
I gotta find some friends in the Midwest that can send me some of this, because
that's it.
Or I just have to take a trip. That's all.
And then, of course, you get back to Far North and everything they're doing. Just tremendous stuff. So anyway, I didn't mean to prattle on, but those are some. Oh, and the other one is Tattersall Distilling. Love Tattersall. Tattersall is really great stuff.
All right, we're going from the Midwest to the Southwest, and well, let's stick with the name High West. We've had a lot of it. We get lots of High West here. Balcones, which I've only had samples from people, and we've had independent bottlers coming up to Alberta for Balcones, but we don't have their product, their distillery releases. We don't have that. And I've gotten this one, so Yellow Rose from obviously from Texas.
Yellow Rose is one of my favorite distillers in Texas is Millam & Green, and it's run by Marcia Millam and Heather Green, and they are making
yes.
I love their whiskeys. Yeah. I can't say enough about their stuff, man.
She is a fellow writer as well, so I was trying to get Heather on there.
And it's 2 women running the place, and they are doing a spectacular job. And it doesn't matter their sex in that way, but what they're doing is spectacular. Doesn't
What's
matter.
The name of her book? My wife read it. I'm asking.
Oh, I can't think of it. It's killing me now.
She was reading it. Whiskey Connect. Whiskey. No. She'll figure it out. But anyways, so there's another book. So Heather Green wrote a book, and she also does some videos on YouTube.
And she's been in Forbes and Wine Enthusiast and all these other places. She's fantastic. They are making spectacular whiskey. Love
And
this.
she's an artist too, because Lou Bryson was with her, and he uses her icon. She drew a picture of his face in 20 seconds, and he decided to use that online. So that's his new picture, his new icons, Heather Green's picture of him. So that's kind of cool.
That's too funny. Yeah, and of course there's High West. David Perkins was certainly started High West. Another fascinating person who created an iconic whiskey. Can
you tell me a bit about High West? They've got the tall.
High West was originally one of Larry Ebersold's. There it is, Whiskey Distilled. She's fantastic. She's absolutely fantastic. One of the great heroes in whiskey. Period. He was among one of the first, like 5 or 6 people who started to buy lots of. When I say lots, I mean lot 1, lot 2, lot 4 of whiskey. Excuse me, from Larry Ebersold, and he created one of the most iconic ryes out there called a Midwinter Night's Dram, which is a blend of straight rye whiskeys, and it's aged in French oak, and it is absolutely a spectacular whiskey. Very hard to find. They only make small quantities of it every year. But if you see a Midsummer Night's Dram, make sure you get a bottle. It's a great whiskey.
It's a little bit expensive. And you know what? I kicked myself because I saw the bottle, and I buy enough that I shouldn't have shied away from it. It's stupid. But I was thinking, you know what? That's a little bit too much. I'm going to pass.
It's not cheap. That's not cheap.
But then I talk about with friends, and they're going, why? Get it. I'll split the bottle with you. We'll do whatever. We'll take it.
Amazing. It's amazing stuff. So hard. And it was gone, right? It was gone.
Yeah.
I did the same thing. It was above $100, and I was like, I really don't want to spend that kind of money. I've got enough booze. I don't need any more stuff. And then I went back just like you, and it was already gone.
Yeah.
And
so your 100 was my 140.
And the worst part is I have to.
My 140 for a rye is a bit beyond what you will pay for a rye. So $100 is a lot for you for a rye. For me, 140, because rye is younger. To enjoy the rye, great ryes are younger. They're not.
Don't have to be really old. The funny thing about the Midnight's Dram is that I calculated later that I spent more money buying a shot of it wherever I went than it would have cost to buy the damn bottle. So I should have just bought the damn bottle.
Yeah. So yes, and it's a beautiful bottle too. It's a classical look to it, and it's a classic label. It's unassuming, really. But
David Perkins, it was very funny because Larry Ebersold said he was kind of like one of the most flighty guys when I met him that I ever met, and he goes, it turned out he was a genius. But when I first met him, I was like, oh, I don't know about this guy, and of course, Perkins went on to create one of the most iconic rye whiskeys in America.
I've had students like that too. It's like, whoa, really? But that you find out later, it's like they
went on to do great stuff.
And they're on so many other levels at the same time. It's like, ooh, okay.
So if we're going to go to the West Coast, there's a couple that I like, especially and for different reasons. So I have to tell you that Masterson's, for example, is out of Sonoma, and it is it's 100% rye.
Yeah,
it's from Alberta. But one of the most fascinating things was tell me a story. The story of Bat Masterson is fascinating. He was, a Wild West character who later became one of the best boxing writers in America. And he was also a great political columnist.
Boxing writer.
Very clever. He was really a great character to read about. And I thought, not only is the whiskey drinkable, but I'm following hook, line, and sinker for the marketing hook, which is Matt Masterson.
Well, you're a sports guy too. You enjoy your sports. You write about sports as well.
Yeah, so for me, it was a win-win with Masterson.
Compatible.
He was a really interesting character. Let me see. The other one that I wanted to make a couple of the other ones that I wanted to make sure to mention were come on. Where is it?
Leopold Brothers, Pendleton.
Well, no, that's wait, don't get there yet. Savage and Cook is with what's his name, Dave Finney. So if you've heard of a wine called The Prisoner, Dave Finney invented The Prisoner. So he sold The Prisoner off to a big conglomerate and started a whiskey company. He does not make the whiskey; he buys the whiskey, but he ages it in wine barrels that he buys from various friends around Sonoma and Napa, and all the whiskeys are aged in rye. I actually found that the Savage and Cook lip service was actually a really wonderful rye whiskey, and of course it was aged in a red wine barrel and had all this lovely softness that was provided by the fruit, and it was actually a really good whiskey.
Smart idea with the wine though, because
and he's not
see that with the crimes.
A whiskey guy, but that's
what to know the story.
Smart work. Marketing was really smart doing. I think I mentioned these guys earlier, but Wright and Brown in California, Captain Dan Wright also works a tugboat as well as the head distiller. But Colorado has so much going on. Let's start with, of course, Leopold Brothers, because they're the main show when it comes to all this stuff that we've mentioned Todd a gazillion times. So I have spent, there you go. I have spent an inordinate amount of time bending Todd's ear over the phone. We spent a lot of time. We're roughly the same age, and we had a lot of similar experiences. And so he's one of those guys that I could sit there and talk all day with. I'm sure. I know at one point they were like, "Get off the phone, man, because we need you." And I was just like, "No, not yet." Fascinating character. He's brought back the three-chamber still, one of the most iconic distilling machines ever created, and he done it with a Brooksy rice, and I did a special piece on that as well. Not rice, rye, and just really what he's doing there is creating this big, fat, oily rye like nobody else, and it's spectacular. And what they're and the other thing about them is that it's their brothers. It's two brothers who started Leopold Brothers, and the other brother has created a distillery that has I think they're, if not zero, they have like one of the smallest carbon footprints. And
that was his job previously. He was in the industry trying to, go to large industries and show them how to reduce their carbon imprint, not just carbon.
They're almost zero carbon, or they are zero carbon, which is crazy when you think about it.
I actually talked to his brother, and his brother wasn't into it. No, Todd's good. He's the vocal piece. He wants to talk. Yeah. I tried to get the brother online when I was doing the international whiskey journey this summer. Nope.
No. I got him on the phone, and he goes, "Here, talk to Todd." And I'm like, "No." So I said, "Todd, does he ever talk to anybody?" He goes, "No, not really." Okay. And he said, from what I understand, a great guy. And Todd says nothing but great things about. I just want you to know your brother says nothing but great things about you. One of the ones I thought was really interesting in Colorado was called Aspen. It's called Lock and Company, and they age their rye in Colorado aspen. Now it gives it a completely different flavor. It's very acidic. It's not what you expect, but it's really unique and really fun. It's called Lock and Company, and they age their rye in barrels made with aspen, which is fantastic. Also Rising. Is it Rising Sun? Old Elk. Old Elk is a fairly popular brand. Again, a craft distiller, and that's where Greg Metz does his slow cut proofing, where he proofs by stages over a long period of time. And that's a really lovely rye. So I want to make sure I mention.
I'll go back to Lock and Co with you. How long is it aged in those barrels? Because I'm guessing that they're more porous, right? So I think it would go faster if it's more porous.
I don't have a note onto how long they age it.
Okay, that's all right. I'll reach out. I'm sure they're online somewhere. I'll figure it out.
Great for cocktails, by the way. It's a really good cocktail rye. Let's see. And then that puts us, that's the west. Let's see. Obviously, there's Pendleton in the west. Another great story. It's Canadian rye, bottled in the U.S. It's named for the Pendleton Roundup, which is one of the oldest roundups in North America. And which, again, you have this sort of fascinating, here's this lovely whiskey, but the story that they're using is just as cool. And the Roundup still happens every year. So you're talking about a really wonderful event that it's tied to, and really fascinating reading. No question. Oh, one of my other favorites, I'm going to jump here for just a second, is Fremont Mischief Distillery. And what they did, this was fascinating. There was a series called,
Now we say Fremont. I think Fremont Street in Las Vegas. So is there the link to anything?
So there was a show about Deadliest Catch. Deadliest Catch. So what these guys did was they put barrels of their whiskey on 4 of the different ships in Deadliest Catch, and they got that kind of saltiness to them as they went through.
Well,
and got all that rocket and motion going, and so they kept those bottlings separate, so you could buy the whiskey from any one of the 4 different ships that you followed on the Deadliest Catch. So that was kind of fun. There you go. So that's another one.
I'm having a hard time keeping up. I'm afraid, Carlo.
It's okay. I'm just
I'm in Texas now.
So that brings us to Canada.
Okay, Canada. I'm just gonna ask you for the ones because I've had so many Canadian ryes, and I promote them, and every Tuesday I do it with Davin, Blair, who wrote the book with Davin. This book right here. So my Tuesdays are usually whiskeys, and my ryes are my favorite. But I do want to ask you about memory. So go back to your memory, not just what the rye tasted like, but a place where the person impressed you or made an impression. Let's do that.
Certainly Don Giamante did. I mean, he really was a huge impression on me. Look, when you come from the U.S. to Canada, the first thing that smacks you is Dave Mitton and Don Livermore. I mean, the fact that they promote the same whiskeys. There's nothing like that anywhere in North America. You're talking about 2 of the biggest personalities in the entire industry, and to know that they're both on the same team, it's like Gehrig and Babe Ruth on the same lineup. Like, how do you even beat that? I have no clue. And again, these are 2 guys that, I mean, I couldn't compare it with. I mean, these are guys that you're asking before who's on that upper level. I mean, these 2 guys are way, way up on that upper level.
So they impressed you. So that's the impressing one with me.
Beyond. I just thought they were absolutely fascinating. And Dave and I, again, were on the phone for hours. I mean, I just have multiple hours of him taped and us talking. And it just made me sad that not more of it was in the book, but we were already pressed for as it was. The other 2 things that I really wanted to mention were 2 stories that really struck me, which is Rick Murphy, who used to be over at ADL. He was there for 23 years as the master distiller. He is without question the Larry Ebersol of Canadian whiskey. I mean, here's a guy who quietly made so much whiskey that the world has drank over a 23-year period, but was one of those quiet lunch pail guys that just went to work every day and did his job. And you just sit there and you think, wow, it's so fascinating that these guys are out there. So I wrote a small piece about him because I just thought he was such a sort of classic craftsman.
I agree, and not a limelight kind of guy either. He doesn't search the limelight. He'll talk to you though. He's approachable.
It's hard to find, man. Let me tell you that. The other guy that was really fascinating to me was Grimsby. Grimsby over at 40 Creek.
Oh,
no, not Grimsby. What's his name?
40 Creek.
Bill
Ashburn. Yeah, and I've got a lot of 40 Creek.
So my favorite story about him was that he actually had the barrel of whiskey that he made on his first day. And he also worked there for 28 years. And before he left, he bottled that 28-year-old whiskey at 40 Creek. And that to me is one of the coolest stories in all of whiskey. Here's a guy who's had a tremendous career, but actually has the barrel that he first made when he first got there.
And he doesn't talk to a lot of people. Bill is kind of shy. He doesn't like going on camera. I've got a lot of his stuff as well, but he's
such a talented guy.
But we disagree on the cast strength thing, and we've had he doesn't like cast strength. He doesn't really believe in it. He thinks there's a certain percentage for a certain liquid that you put in the bottle, and just because you, Dolph, you like cast strength because you like Scotch and Scotch stuff is cast strength, you shouldn't expect cast strength. And this year he had to put something out that's just a little bit stronger and a little bit stronger. So he's being pushed by
it's interesting. When I first got into the business, I really wasn't all that thrilled with cast strength, but I've also learned too that I try to explain to people that sometimes the much smoother expression of a whiskey is the cask strength rather than the lower strength, the proof strength. It's absolutely the lower proof strength. It's absolutely nine times out of 10, it's the smoother, better whiskey. Oh, there you go. Look at you.
Well, we got lots of 40 Creek stuff in this house. So
look at you.
Open. So, and I actually do a 40 Creek weekend because they have a whiskey weekend in September every year. And I invite friends over here and we grab the bottles that have been opened. So we have entirely too much to drink. It's all 40 Creek. And then, yeah, people Uber home.
Have a good weekend. Really one of the other people that impressed me when you asked, like, who impresses you?
Yes,
was,
sir.
Caitlin Quinn over at Eau Claire.
I love Caitlin.
She is such an inspiring story, and they make great whiskey. And I was so, I did not get a chance to speak to her, but reading about her was fascinating. And she made a huge impression on me. I thought more people need to know about her. I was super, super, super impressed with her. I found her
to the same university as Dr. Don. Same university as Dr. Don, and born in Winnipeg, raised in Scotland. So I think she was 3 months old or 6 months old when she left. I don't know. She was really, really young. So she was Canadian and able to come back. And she loves the fact that she gets to experiment with Eau Claire because she's in charge. It's her baby. And she said if she was in Scotland, she'd be in charge of one line, one thing very specific that she'd repeat and repeat. And now she gets to just do whatever she wants. And the Plowman's Rye, though, she says she's never going to do it again. And I keep bugging her because I really want her to, because I liked it so much. So now when I see a bottle, I buy it just to have a few because she's fairly adamant that she's never making rye again because she's not going to use anything that's, she no enzymes. So she wants all natural all the time. And without the enzymes, it's just too tough for her, she said.
Yeah.
So if you see the Plowman's Rye, you got to buy it. You have to buy it. Because
there you go. That's a famous bottle of rye. That's a famous bottle of rye. The other people that I like are Shelter Point and Sheringham, which of course, if you can even get a drop to taste, is always a hoot. But they were lovely.
If you're in Ontario, you can get Sheringham a lot. Us, it's a little bit less. LCBO buys a lot of it.
So. They were great people, and I really love what they were doing. And of course, Dillon's, right? Because Dillon's is like so incredibly unique. And I was just floored by how they operate and the product they put out. I was just floored by what they do. And again, just a great tandem, a father-son kind of thing. And it's just it's spectacular. So I really love it.
Sounds a little bit odd, but one of the best bottles in the industry, because if you turn the bottle around, you see the process. The distilling process is actually emboldened on the bottle itself. Beautiful bottle. So it's worth it to buy it just for the bottle. But once you start drinking it, you start enjoying it a lot. And that's LCBO. They get a lot of Dillons as well. We get it here out west as well.
Oh, is that right? Oh,
beautiful bottle. It's nice.
People, right. Oh no, their packaging is as superb as what's in the bottle. It's one of those things where sometimes you see a fancy bottle and you go, whatever's inside's not as going to be as good as what's on the outside. But Dillon's, it's as good inside as it is outside. Of course, that brings us back to Hiram Walker. I mean, Hiram Walker is just doing absolutely tremendous whiskeys. I mean, I'm a huge fan of the Lot 40 program. I don't think they have a bottle that they put out yet in terms of what are they? They have three different, they have 3 or 4 now.
I think it's 5 now.
Is it 5 now?
The regular Lot 40. There's the cast strength that they have. They've got the peated. They've got the
peated, right?
Cast,
right.
And they have that. I don't know what they call it, the Eastern European.
Right.
Dr. Don comes on with my society every July. The past 2 Julys, we're his guinea pigs, where he'll put out some stuff and he wants some opinions as to what's coming out. So it's not the bottles we get; these things they're laboratory bottles that he puts out and he sends to me, and we do our tasting and all our members and the group behind. They listen to the comments. I don't know how many. He doesn't do it to a lot of groups, but it's fantastic. And the peated quarter cask was my favorite 2 years ago. And I'm really happy they put that out this year. It's really
fantastic stuff. And of course, the JP Weisers has been a great line. They've done a great job with that. So it's just been, and of course, I did like the Canadian Club 100% rye. I thought that was a really nice bottle of rye as well. And the one that was really unique, like sort of quirky fun that I really enjoyed was Kinsip House Fine Spirits, and they do a rye called Revival that I thought was actually really impressive.
Say that again.
It's a tiny operation.
Where are they? In Ontario, possibly?
Yes.
Kinsip House.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, they're really great. Of course, you know, last straw, and there was one other that I really liked. But I love the history of distilling in Canada. That was as much fun writing about that as anything else. I'll tell you, there was a shocker. There's a very small producer. Oh no, Stillhead Distillery. Loved Stillhead Distillery. Brennan Colbank doing some really good stuff out there. Really fascinating guy. Small batch, really good quality stuff. I want to make sure I give a shout out to him. Another one of those guys where I called him thinking, okay, well, I'll ask him a couple of perfunctory questions and kind of get out. And he was so he was so passionate. Like you could just like, oh wow, okay, let's start talking. We just went off.
And that's the endearing thing, right? That's the endearing thing that comes off. So,
and again, that's where if you're passion is such an important part of what it's all about.
Well, sir, we're coming to the end of it. I'm going to ask you for some last comments before I kind of wrap it all up. And it's hard to have last comments with a book and a tome with so much information, but it's worth it because this was so fun.
First of all, thank you enough for having me. Really can't thank you enough.
No, thank you for writing the book. That's good. And if everyone out there, you got to buy this book. There's so much information. There's just so much.
The good thing, Dolph, is that in the last 3 weeks you didn't need to go to the gym because every time you lifted my book, it's a great workout.
Shoulder and it's good, but value for the money. There's a lot in there, but you're getting some value.
I hope so. I would hope so.
That's what we got to say. So, last comments from you, sir.
Okay. About Rye or about the book? All right. Well,
Anything
certainly buy
you
the
want. It
Spirit
could
of
be
Rye, please.
existential if you want.
My dog's relying on it. No, I didn't go into this book with the intention of writing this massive tome. I really didn't. I thought I'll write a nice book about rye and we'll include some tasting notes. It'll be great. And the more I got into it, the more exciting people I found, and the more I was absolutely floored by the history of the grain, the history of the whiskey, which is so incredibly unique. It is a uniquely American, North American product. And it is. I mean, that's really what it is. It's a great North American product. There was no rye whiskey in Scotland or Ireland. Rye is a spirit that was created here, and it's really indicative of North America. Period. And so that was fascinating. And then you meet the numerous people who are making this stuff. And one of my first interviews, which is up at the front of the book, was Jay Coleshoot. He said, you have to be a bit of a masochist to make rye. And every distiller I talked to said, laughed every time I mentioned that quote. I said, what do you think of that quote? They all said, same thing. You have to be a masochist to make rye. Or they just laughed. They just started laughing. So even Larry Ebersol laughed at that. So, but it's such a unique product, and I truly mean it when I say that rye is one of the most expressive grains that whiskey is made from, and that rye whiskey is almost akin to wine because it's expressive of place, it's expressive of the grain you use, and there are so many grains. And for somebody who says, "Oh, well, what does that matter?" Okay, great. So you drink a Pinot Noir, which is made from a Pinot Noir grape, and then you drink a Cabernet Sauvignon made from a Cabernet Sauvignon grape. They're two completely different wines. They're both wine, but they're not the same. And I think that rye is exactly the same. You can make it out of rosin rye. You can make it out of the Abruzzi rye. You can make it out of we have a black rye down south. A number of local southern rye are made with black rye. You go all over the place. The ryes taste different. They express not just region, but they express the distiller's vision for what they're doing and what they're trying to accomplish. And I don't think that any other whiskey is that expressive as rye is. That said, I don't think there's any book that has any more information about rye than what we put in there. And I have to say, by the time I was done with it, I thought to myself, I really hope that I've written a book that makes any other book about rye kind of redundant, because I really tried to put everything in there that I could find, not just to have the kitchen sink, but to tell the whole story of rye. And that was the other interesting part. At one point, I had this long conversation saying, well, shouldn't this be more of a narrative? And we'll just write this one big, ugly narrative. And I thought, that's not what it is, because rye has so many of these little different things going on all around it. It's a constantly evolving thing. It would be impossible, and so but at the same time, there's so many great stories, like Linnell from Red Hook, who did the Red Hook Rye and created this unique bottle of rye that if you can buy in a bottle today, it's $30,000, right, with a big arm. I mean, it's just incredible. And there's so many wonderful people involved and so many good whiskeys to try, and they're all unique. And so even the big producers make unique whiskeys. They're not just these bland things. So it's a fascinating world, and I certainly hope that I illuminated it.
Well, the one thing we do see is your passion, kind sir. Just like all those distillers that endear you to them, the passion, you've got it. You've demonstrated it, and I've enjoyed it, and I've kind of basked in it a little bit over the past 3 weeks. I've enjoyed it all. So thank you very much for writing the book. Thanks for having the passion for it.
And thank you. I can't say enough. Wait, I've got to pour a dram here. Oh my gosh, I'm dry. Holy moly.
I have 4 different drams on the go. Yeah, I can't remember which
one from Sagamore. I have a Sagamore tequila finish, so that's kind of a fun one.
That's neat.
So and there you go.
I came back to this.
You came back to the Yellow Rose. You're loving the Yellow Rose.
And yes, I am. So
good stuff. It's good stuff.
I'm going to wrap it up. So, Whiskey brother, sister, thank you very much. That's the end of our night. It's been a fantastic early evening that turned into a late evening for me and Carlo, a couple hours ahead. Thanks to the listeners. Thank you very specifically to Carlo. It's been fantastic. I loved having these conversations with you. This makes it all worthwhile for me. So,
well, I can't thank you enough. I really, really can't thank you enough. Just been a huge thrill, and it's so much fun to talk about rye with somebody who's as enthusiastic as I am.
I just loves it. Again. And next, I've got some things coming up next. It's After Rye. I gotta not talk about rye anymore, but this is still interesting. So I'm taking a couple weeks off. So in February 26th. So 4 weeks is when I'm coming back. I'm doing a one night thing with this one. It's a 50 page.
Oh, very cool.
Look at the difference between what I'm going from. I'm going from one to the other. So this is a 50 page, one night ideal. And I'm doing this with the author. And again, Daniel B. How to run a Burns night. And this is kind of cool because it's kind of a modern take on the Burns night. And I had our Burns night last night at the Alberta Scotch Study, very formal, very step-by-step. This one, it's a little bit different. It's what he would do in the modern area is what we're going to kind of talk about. So
very cool.
February 26th, hopefully people can come by, check us out. And as a final note, if you don't want to miss a minute, you click like, you click subscribe. And you and me, sir, hopefully you have a dram with you right now. So you ready? Okay. So here's the good company. Here's the good whiskey. Here's the good conversation. Here's the great books. Fantastic books. Sláinte. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.